He looked right through me, Emily said, her voice thin as paper, like I wasn't even worth the trouble of a glass of water. And honestly, that scared me worse than the job did. Not the firing itself, but the thought that he might be right, that the world would just keep spinning and nobody would notice I was gone. She was wrong. She just hadn't found that out yet. Before we dive in, if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, tap that bell, because stories like this one don't show up every day. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Alright, let's get into it. The morning Emily Carter lost her job, the thermometer outside read 31 degrees, and the old heater inside the Silver Oak Cafe was doing exactly what it always did in November. Just enough to keep the pipes from bursting, and not 1 degree more. Emily had clocked in at 4:15. By sunrise, she'd already refilled every salt shaker in the place, wiped down each table twice, started to full pots of coffee, and choked down half a stale granola bar she'd rediscovered in her apron pocket, left over from 2 days earlier, because she hadn't had time to pack food before leaving the house, and she couldn't afford to buy any from the very kitchen she worked in. That particular irony had stopped being funny somewhere around month 3 or 4. She was 24. She'd poured coffee at this counter for almost 2 years now. She knew every regular by name, knew that Mrs. Paulson took her eggs soft scrambled with 0 pepper, knew that old Dale Hutchkins wanted exactly 1 sugar in his coffee, and would silently push the cup back across the counter if she got it wrong. She knew the exact angle the morning sun cut through the east windows and painted the counter stalls gold around 7 a.m. She knew the sound her sneakers made crossing that cracked linoleum floor well enough to walk it blind. What she had no way of knowing was that this ordinary shift would be her last one here for a while, and she certainly didn't know that the man about to walk through that door was going to crack her whole life wide open and put it back together as something better than she'd ever let herself dream of. The bell over the door jingled at 5:47. Emily was elbow deep in a sugar dispenser behind the counter. She glanced up on reflex, the same automatic, professional half-smile she gave every customer. And then she actually saw him. He was the kind of man who seemed to block out the doorway just by standing in it. Not only his size, though there was plenty of that, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, built the way decades of hard living builds a man, not the way a gym membership does. His beard was grey, full, a little wild at the edges. His face carried the map of years, sun, wind, time, all of it etched in. He had on a black leather vest over a heavy flannel shirt. The vest stitched over with patch after patch, layered the way patches only get layered when a man spent a lifetime earning his place somewhere. His name was Jack Walker, though Emily wouldn't learn that for a few more minutes. Most people just called him Iron. Had 4 longer than the grey in his beard had existed, back from a rougher, angrier, harder to put down version of himself. He rode with the Hells Angels, a full patch member with 30+ years in the Brotherhood behind him, a man who'd buried more friends than he liked to count, raised money for veterans, crossed 40 states onto wheels, and never once had to wonder who he was. None of that history showed on the surface to Emily in that first glance. What showed was how he moved. He wasn't walking so much as bracing, one palm flat against the door frame, the other pressed hard beneath his ribs on the left side. His breath came slow and deliberate, the kind of careful breathing a person does when they've trained themselves not to let pain show on their face, except the body always tells on you eventually. His jaw was locked tight. His eyes swept the room, the way a man's eyes move when he's hunting for somewhere to land before his legs give out. Emily recognized that look. She'd watched it settle over her father's face during the 2 years his illness dragged him down. She'd seen it again on her brother Danny in a hospital bed last spring. She knew it the way you know a language you grew up around, not with your brain exactly, but with something older and quicker buried underneath. She was around the counter before she'd even decided to move. "Hey," she said. Not loud, not fussing, just there. "Come on in. Got a table right here for you." He looked at her for a second, like he might turn around and walk back out. His expression was tangled, pride, exhaustion, and something close to surprise, like he'd braced for something else entirely walking into a place like this looking the way he did at this hour. He'd expected the careful, distant courtesy people give you when they want you gone without having to say so out loud. "I'm all right," he said. His voice came out low and gravelly. A man who'd spent hours out in the cold. "You don't look all right," Emily said, gentle about it. She pulled out the chair closest to the door so he wouldn't have far to walk. "Sit first. You can be all right after." He studied her a beat, then lowered himself into the seat. She didn't even think about it, went straight to the back, grabbed a clean glass, filled it from the filtered tap, and carried it out to him with both hands, setting it down the careful way her mother had taught her. Like the act itself carried weight. "Thank you," he said, and drained half of it in one go. Riding through, heading south, had to stop. She nodded like that explained everything, because more or less it did. "Want some coffee? Fresh pot?" "That'd be good." She poured it, set it down, and gave him room. She didn't hover, didn't fill the silence with small talk. She just went back behind the counter and let him breathe, because sometimes the kindest thing for someone is space to just exist without having to perform anything. About 4 minutes later, he spoke. "Sorry I didn't order right away. Just needed to sit." "That's fine," Emily said, and meant it. "I'll cover the coffee. Don't think twice about it." He gave her a longer look this time, the kind that meant he was actually seeing her, not just the uniform. She was used to being looked past. Most people did that. She was the waitress, background noise, the hand that refilled your cup and cleared your plate. Maybe you said thanks, maybe you didn't. Either way, she was closer to furniture than a person in most eyes that passed through those chairs. This man was looking at her like she was actually there, both perfectly normal and a little jarring at once. "You always taking strangers off the road like this?" he asked. "When they look like they need it," she said. He turned the mug slowly in his hands. "Most places wouldn't have let me pass the door." Emily didn't answer that, mostly because she suspected it was true and didn't feel like dressing it up. She just said, "Well, this one did." And maybe that should have been the end of it. Maybe if Richard Collins hadn't stepped out of the back office exactly 2 minutes later, it would have been. Maybe the whole morning would have drifted along quietly, Jack resting, warming up, paying his tab, riding off, Emily finishing her shift, driving home, helping her brother through his exercises, cooking dinner, chipping away at the utility bill, going to bed. That's not how it went. Richard Collins had managed the cafe for 3 years, and in that time he'd built a very specific picture in his head of what the place should look like and who belonged in it. 38 years old, always sharply dressed, he preached brand image at staff meetings with all the gravity of a man briefing national security. He'd hung a sign behind the counter reading excellence in every interaction, his own idea, and one he was quietly proud of. He came out of the back, spotted Jack sitting near the door, and something shifted across his face, a quick tightening around his eyes and mouth. He walked straight to Emily. "Who is that?" he said, keeping his voice down, but not down enough. "A customer," Emily answered. "Did he order anything?" "Coffee." His eyes drifted back toward Jack, the leather vest, the patches, the grey beard, the scuffed boots. "Is he causing a problem?" "No," Emily said. "He just sat down." "Does he even have money to pay?" That question, the sneer buried in it, the way the answer was already assumed before she'd said a word, was what made Emily's jaw tighten. "I don't interrogate people before I hand them a coffee," she said. "That's not how this works." Richard looked at her like a man already building his case. "Emily, this cafe has an image to protect. When customers see," he stopped, choosing his words, "certain kinds of people in here, it makes the other guests uneasy." "He's not bothering anyone," Emily said. "There are 4 other people in this whole diner, and none of them are even glancing his way." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" He looked at her like she'd said something outrageous. "The point is I make the calls in this establishment, not you. And I'm telling you, we need to handle this, Jack hadn't moved from his table. He sat with his cup, gaze fixed on the window, and Emily couldn't tell whether he could hear any of it. She had a feeling he could, and was choosing not to react. He came in out of the cold, because he wasn't feeling well, Emily said, keeping her tone even. He sat down, had some coffee. That's the whole story. There's nothing to handle. Richard's face hardened. I want him finished and gone. He's not finished. He's a customer, Emily said. He gets to finish his coffee. The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt much longer. She could hear the coffee maker dripping behind her, the low hum of the heater. A chair creaked somewhere across the room, Richard said, very quietly. If you want to keep this job, you're going to walk over there right now and tell him his time's up. Emily looked at him. She thought about rent, about Danny's medical bills stacked on the kitchen table. 8 months of paperwork she'd started sorting by priority, because she couldn't pay them all at once, and at least sorting them gave her the illusion of control. She thought about how badly she needed this paycheck, and how little room she had to lose it. Then she turned and walked to Jack's table anyway. Hey, she said, sitting down across from him. Something she absolutely wasn't supposed to do. Something that would do nothing for her case with Richard watching. How are you feeling? Better, Jack said, looking up at her. Something guarded lived behind his eyes, like he'd caught enough of the argument to understand the shape of things, and was waiting to see what she'd do. Good, Emily said. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Double quotes. When did you last eat? He hesitated. Yesterday. Lunch, maybe. She stood, walked behind the counter, dug into her own purse, not the till, her personal bag, and pulled out $12, nearly everything she had in cash. She handed it to Marcus in the kitchen. Can you throw together a plate? Eggs, toast, whatever's quickest. Put it on my tab. Marcus looked at her. He knew about Richard. He knew the particular flavor of a morning when the manager was in one of his moods. Please, she said. He turned back to the grill without another word. She carried the plate out herself, set it down in front of Jack with both hands, same as she had the water. Jack studied the plate, then her. Something moved across his face that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with simply being human and having something given to you when you least expected it. I can't let you pay for this. He sighed. You didn't ask me to, Emily said, so don't worry about it. She turned around. Richard was standing 3 feet behind her, his face the exact shade of a man humiliated in front of a customer and furious about it, while trying not to look furious, a color somewhere between red and pale. My office, he said. Now, she glanced back at Jack. Eat while it's hot. Then she followed Richard. The office smelled like printer toner and the single cup coffee machine Richard had brought from home, because he didn't trust the kitchen's pot. A framed photo of the cafe from its opening 10 years ago hung on the wall, along with a whiteboard schedule and a plastic ficus in the corner that had never needed watering because it wasn't real. Richard shut the door. He didn't sit. What exactly do you think you're doing? I got him some breakfast, Emily said. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. He wasn't feeling well. I used my own money. That's not your job. It's my money. That's not the point. His voice climbed now, losing the composure he usually kept. You sat down at a customer's table. You spent your own cash on someone I told you needed to leave. You undercut me in front of a customer, in front of the other staff. Do you have any idea how that looks? I understand, Emily said, that a man needed help, and I helped him, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Then let me be very clear. He stared at her. The kind of man who made up his mind fast and never revisited it once he'd decided he was justified. This is not a charity. This is not a shelter. This is a business. And if you can't function within this business's standards, then what? Emily said, quiet, steady. Then I need you to go home. The words sat in the air a moment. She looked at him. You're firing me for handing a man a glass of water and a plate of eggs. I'm releasing you from your position due to unprofessional conduct. Unprofessional conduct. She repeated it back to him, not a question, just testing the weight of the phrase. You can gather your things. I heard you. She stepped out of the office and back into the cafe. Jack sat at his table, half the eggs gone, one slice of toast eaten. He looked up when she reappeared, and whatever he read on her face made his own expression shift, not dramatically. Just a small change a face makes when it registers that something's gone wrong. Emily walked to the counter, retrieved her purse from under the register, grabbed her jacket off the hook, picked up her scarf from the coat rack. She did it all without ceremony, without drama, because she'd learned a long time ago the world rarely rewards drama from people in her position. She was nearly at the door when Jack called her name. She stopped, turned. He was holding out the money she'd used to buy his breakfast, the $12, hers, not his. His face carried something she hadn't expected. Not pity, something cleaner and harder than pity, something closer to recognition. Take it back, he said. No, she said. I've got money. I can pay for my own food. I know, she said. I didn't do it because I thought you couldn't. He held the bills out another moment, then slowly lowered his hand, eyes still on her, the eyes of a man who'd seen plenty and was working hard to make sense of exactly this. What happened? He asked. She almost let it go, almost said nothing and just walked out the way she usually swallowed things whole. But there was something about this enormous, weathered, clearly worn down man sitting alone with a plate of half-eaten eggs she'd bought with her last cash that made her want to just tell the truth. He fired me, she said. My manager. For helping you. Jack went very still. I'm sorry. I need to go, Emily said, and pushed through the door. The cold hit her hard. Real November cold. Nothing like the filtered version inside. The lot was nearly empty. Her car, one other, and a heavy, well-kept motorcycle parked off to the side, chrome catching the thin morning light. She climbed into her car, but didn't start it. Her hands were shaking a little, not tears. She was past the age of crying over jobs most days, but the leftover static of adrenaline after a confrontation, the body's electricity, with nowhere left to go. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen table, about the copay for Danny's next appointment, about the electricity bill sitting 16 days past due. I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing. I just can't always afford to. Footsteps. She looked up. Jack Walker was crossing the lot toward her, moving steadier now than when he'd walked in, the food and rest clearly working on him, carrying something in his hand. Money, a folded stack of bills. He reached her window. She rolled it down. For the meal, he said, holding it out. I told you, not just the meal, he said. For what it cost you. She shook her head. That's not Emily. He said her name. He'd known her far longer than 20 minutes. Quiet. Certain weight behind it. You helped me because it was right. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know what it would cost you. You just did it. He paused. Take the money, please. She looked at the cash, then at him. No, I'm sorry. I can't. He held her gaze a long moment, then nodded once, slow, a man acknowledging something he hadn't expected to run into. All right. He stepped back from the car. She thought he'd say goodbye. Instead, what's your last name? Carter. Emily Carter. How long have you worked here? Almost 2 years. You from around here? Red Valley. My whole life. He nodded again, studying her the way people study something they mean to remember. She wasn't sure what to do with that look, so she just held it. People like you are rare, he said finally, quiet and certain, the way people talk when they fully mean what they're saying. And people like you shouldn't ever have to stand alone. She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't think he expected an answer. He walked back to his bike. She heard the engine roll over, deep and rolling, cutting through the cold, and then he was gone down the road, taillights shrinking and vanishing around the bend. She sat alone in her car a while longer before finally turning the key and driving home. The drive took 8 minutes. She could have done it blind. Knew the pothole outside the church on Miller Street you had to swerve around. Knew the badly timed light at Cedar and Fifth that always caught people off guard. She drove it on autopilot, while her mind worked somewhere else entirely. She'd done the right thing. She'd still believe that tomorrow, and the day after. But right now, in the specific present tense of this particular November morning, doing the right thing had cost her a paycheck. Danny had a follow-up in 3 weeks. The power was 16 days overdue. She pulled into the driveway of the house she'd grown up in, small, a little worn, her mother's garden out front that Emily tried to keep alive when she had time, which wasn't often. She sat a moment before going in. The sky was brightening. The day was starting whether she was ready or not, inside. Danny was already up, which surprised her. He usually slept until 7 or 8 on days without appointments. He sat at the kitchen table in his wheelchair, wearing a faded grey sweatshirt from a college he'd never attended, something he'd picked up at a thrift store for reasons he'd never bothered explaining. 20 years old, paralyzed from the waist down since an accident 4 years back, he had a particular sharpness to his gaze that Emily always figured came from having to watch things closely when you couldn't reach out and change them yourself. He took one look at her and said, "What happened? Morning to you too," Emily said. She set her keys on the counter, filled a glass at the sink, drank half of it staring out at the frost still clinging to the backyard grass. "I got fired," she said. Danny was quiet a beat. "Okay. Why, I helped a man who came into the diner this morning. He wasn't doing well, needed water, needed food. I gave it to him." Richard decided that was unprofessional. Who was he? A biker? Hell's Angel? She turned to look at him. He came in by himself, hurting. Just needed a place to sit for a few minutes. I helped him and Richard turned it into a whole production. Danny sat with that. You couldn't just apologize, even if you didn't mean it. She shook her head. He called that man a certain type. Like wearing a leather vest made him not worth basic decency. I'm not sorry for disagreeing with that. Danny studied her for a long stretch, weighing what she'd done against the practical cost of it. The way he always did, practical, thoughtful, and painfully aware every single day of what it cost to live the way they lived. "Okay," he said again. Then, after a pause, "For what it's worth." "That was the right call, I know," Emily said, sitting across from him. The bills were still there. She hadn't touched them. She looked at them, looked at the ceiling, looked back at her brother. "I'll figure it out. I always do. I know you will." She made coffee. She made eggs. She didn't mention the $12, not wanting him to feel guilty. She didn't mention what Jack had said in the parking lot either. Asterisk people like you shouldn't ever have to stand alone asterisk. Because she didn't know what to do with it yet, and wasn't ready to say it out loud. The morning ground on. Danny watched TV. Emily sat with her phone and a notepad, running the math. How long she could stretch things, what bills could wait, who might be hiring, whether any other diner in town had an opening. Ugly math, familiar math, the kind that always somehow resolved into something workable. Barely. She was deep in it when her phone rang. Unknown number, Red Valley area code. She almost let it go. She answered. A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Emily Carter, who works at the Silver Oak Cafe." "Worked," she said. "Not anymore." A brief pause. "My name's Dale. I ride with a chapter out of Riverside. A friend of mine, Jack Walker, reached out to us about something that happened this morning. Just wanted to make sure you were okay." Emily went still. "What?" "Jack told us what happened," Dale said. "What you did, and what it cost you. He wanted people to know." "I'm fine," Emily said. "Because that's what you said. It's just a job. I'll find another one." "I'm sure you will," Dale said. "But that's not really the point, is it?" She didn't answer. "A lot of us have walked into places and gotten treated like a threat," he went on. "And then somebody treats you like a human being. And it means more than you'd think. Jack wanted people to know that somebody in Red Valley did that today. That's all this is." After the call ended, she sat staring at the wall. She had no idea what it meant, what Jack telling people meant, what Dale's "that's not really the point" meant, what any of it meant against the very real bills on the table. But something in her chest had loosened, just slightly, some tightness she hadn't fully noticed until it eased. She didn't feel quite as alone as she had that morning, sitting in the cafe parking lot with the whole day still ahead of her and the weight of the math pressing behind her eyes. She had no idea Dale's call was only the opening move. She had no idea Jack Walker had done far more than make one phone call. That across the state, in mechanic shops and gas station backlots and garages, where men with heavy bikes gathered to drink coffee and keep company that outlasted most things, a single message was already traveling person to person, chapter to chapter. The way things move inside a brotherhood. She didn't know that somewhere north of town, Jack was sitting with the leadership of his chapter, and that this particular conversation wasn't going to end in words. It was going to end in engines. Dale's call wasn't the last one that day. By 2 in the afternoon, 4 more had come in. Different voices, different names, different area codes. One from Sacramento, one from somewhere in the Central Valley, to more out of Riverside. None threatening, none aggressive, all variations on the same thing. Men who'd heard what happened, calling to check in, to say what Richard did was wrong, and what she did hadn't gone unnoticed. She didn't know what to make of any of it. Danny watched her take the calls from across the living room with an expression she recognized, the one where he was, absorbing something and holding his thoughts, until he'd finished processing. After the 5th call, he asked, "Who are these people?" "Bikers," Emily said. "Friends of the guy from this morning." "How many friends does this man have?" She glanced at her phone, starting to think, a lot. She tried not to read too much into it. People called. People expressed sympathy. That was ordinary human decency. And it didn't automatically add up to anything. It wouldn't pay the electric bill. It wouldn't make Richard Collins any less pleased with himself, probably sitting in that office right now with his single-serve coffee maker and his excellent sign, certain he'd handled things correctly. She tried to file the calls under kindness received and move on, but something about the way each one ended stuck with her. None of the men signed off with the vague, slightly awkward finality of someone who'd done their duty and was ready to move on. Every goodbye trailed rather than concluded, like they were still thinking something through, like something was still in motion. She told herself she was overthinking a handful of phone calls from strangers. She made dinner. She got Danny through his evening routine. 30 minutes of movements the hospital had given them to keep circulation going and stave off the complications that came with prolonged immobility. She knew it cold by now, knew exactly how to angle her hands to give him the right resistance without straining either of them. 4 years of doing this together had built a rhythm, efficient, and not without its share of dry humor, since Danny's wit tended to surface hardest when he was most uncomfortable. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said mid-leg extension, grunting with effort. "Don't. I'm just saying it reminds me of the time you were convinced the neighbor's cat was running some kind of scheme. That cat was acting suspicious. The cat was a cat. It had very watchful eyes." He laughed. Exactly what she'd been going for, and she held the position a beat longer before letting him rest. Afterward, she got him settled, washed the dinner dishes, and sat back down with her phone and her notepad and the numbers she'd made to calls about work. A diner on the east side had told her they weren't hiring but to check back in January. A grocery store on Route 9 sometimes had openings for night shift stocking, minimum wage, nothing extra. She'd left a message with the manager. Not much. She looked at the bills again. Danny's next copay, $240, non-negotiable. She'd tried deferring one once, and the clinic had nearly dropped him. The electric bill, $63, and her parents' old mortgage, the one she'd taken over rather than lose the house, due in 11 days. She ran the math again, though she'd already run it, because running it made her feel like she had some grip on something. Even when she didn't, her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Unknown number, a different, more distant area code. She answered, "Emily Carter." The voice was older, gravel-edged, the voice of a man used to giving orders, and also, somehow, the voice of a man used to sitting quietly with people. She couldn't say how a single voice conveyed both, but it did. Speaking, Name's Roy Callahan, chapter president, out of Bakersfield. He said it simply. No weight attached. Jack Walker got in touch with me this afternoon, told me what you did, and what happened to you because of it. She was quiet a moment. How many people did he call? Roy seemed to think it over. Depends how you count it. He called me. I called 3 more. They called others. That's how it moves. How what moves? When something matters, Roy said. She exhaled, pressed her fingers flat against the table. I appreciate the calls, she said carefully. I do. But I'm not sure what you want me to say. I made a decision. I stand by it. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing, Roy repeated, and something in his tone wasn't mockery. Closer to satisfaction, like she'd said exactly what he expected, and it confirmed something for him. I'm not expecting you to say anything, he said. I'm calling to let you know Jack told us the entire story. The water, the eggs, the money you spent that you wouldn't take back, a pause, and the part where you looked your manager dead in the eye and told him that man was a person before he was anything else. Hearing her own words come back at her through a stranger's mouth landed differently than saying them in the moment had. She'd said them without thinking, the way you do when the truth is simpler than any argument against it. Hearing them repeated, she understood for the first time why Jack had held on to them. I just said what was true, she said. I know, said Roy. That's exactly why it's worth remembering. After he hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand and tried to name what she was feeling. Not hope. Hope felt premature given the bills and the lack of any real plan. Something smaller and sturdier than hope. Something more like the knowledge that a few strangers had heard what happened and landed on the right side of it. She went to bed at 10:30, lying in the dark, listening to the pipes tick, a neighbor's television murmuring faintly through the wall, the particular hush of a November night settling over the block. She thought about Danny's appointment, about the grocery store on Route 9, about whether she should have taken Jack's money, not because the ethical call had been wrong, but because the ethical call and the practical one didn't always line up, and she was living close enough to the edge that it mattered. Eventually she slept, dreaming of nothing she'd remember, what she couldn't have known, wouldn't fully understand until much later, pieced together from things Jack told her and things she overheard. Was everything happening while she slept? Jack had ridden south after leaving the cafe lot that morning. Not far. He'd pulled into a gas station outside town, cut the engine, and just sat there thinking. Something he did well, but 61 years of practice. He thought about Emily coming around the counter without a second's hesitation, about the glass of water carried with both hands, and the way she'd given him room afterward instead of hovering or performing kindness at him, about the $12 and the plate set down with a simple eat while it's hot. Like spending your last cash on a stranger who hadn't even asked was the most natural thing in the world. And he thought about Richard Collins. He'd caught most of the conversation from his table, enough to understand its shape, the particular tone of a man who'd spent years deciding who deserved comfort and who didn't, dressed up in the language of professionalism and brand image, without even the honesty to call it what it was. Jack had run into men like Richard his whole life. Not the same face, but the same breed, the kind who mistook cruelty for competence and called the discomfort they manufactured themselves a business necessity. What those men never grasped was that the smallness they projected outward always said far more about them than about whoever they aimed it at. He called Roy Callahan around 8:30 that morning, sitting at the gas station with a cup of truly terrible coffee he drank anyway, just to have something to do with his hands. He gave Roy the whole thing, not the summary, the actual account. The pain in his side that had been bothering him for 3 weeks. The pain his doctor had waved off as manageable with rest that Jack never quite got around to taking. The door, the blonde girl who hadn't hesitated, the water, the coffee, the eggs, the $12. The manager who'd looked at a leather vest and decided it was a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be served. The parking lot conversation, and what she'd said there. Roy listened all the way through without interrupting. One of the things Jack had always respected in him. Roy understood some things need room to be finished before they can be properly answered. When Jack wrapped up, Roy said, "She turned the money down. Both times." A pause. "What do you want to do?" "I want people to know," Jack said. "That's all. I want the right people to know." Roy understood exactly what that meant, and what it didn't. This wasn't about rolling in armed with grievance to settle a score. The Brotherhood did that too, when the situation called for it, when someone of theirs had been genuinely wronged and the wrong needed correcting through presence and will and the plain, unmistakable message of solidarity. But that wasn't this. This was something else, something harder to put into words, but that both men understood anyway. When someone does something genuinely good and gets punished for it, that punishment doesn't get to be the last word. Roy made calls. Those calls made more calls. The network moved with a speed that would have startled anyone outside it, not because it was organized with any precision, but because it didn't need to be. The Brotherhood had its own gravity. When something mattered, word found the people who could act on it. What mattered about Emily Carter wasn't the job. Jobs could be replaced. It was the principle. Someone had helped a person weaker than herself, at real cost to herself, without performing it, without expecting a thing back, and had been punished for it by a man who dressed the punishment up in policy language and figured that made it acceptable. That was the kind of thing the Brotherhood didn't just watch happen and walk past. By midnight, Roy had reached contacts in 4 counties. By 1 a.m. Senior members of the Riverside chapter were deep in a conversation, focused not on revenge but on response. By 2, something not quite a plan, but moving steadily toward one, had begun taking shape. The message traveling the network was simple. *Red Valley, Silver Oak Cafe, tomorrow morning. Not an order, just a message. And the message carried its own weight. Mechanics set alarms they didn't need, because they were already awake with it on their minds. Veterans who hadn't ridden together in months checked the weather and started figuring out departure times. Men working early shifts found coverage. Men who didn't need to arrange anything at all just decided, and went to sleep with it settled. This was what Jack had meant in that parking lot, and what Emily hadn't fully caught at the time. People like you shouldn't ever have to stand alone. He hadn't been offering a sentiment. He'd been stating a fact about what was coming next. Emily had no idea about any of this when she woke at 6:15 the next morning, fast, the way she always woke, no slow drift back into consciousness, just awake and then fully awake, the day already leaning on her. She lay still a moment, letting yesterday settle back onto her shoulders. The diner, the argument, the firing, the bills, the calls, then got up, because lying there wasn't going to help. She made coffee, checked her phone. Nothing from the grocery store manager yet. Too early. She'd expected that. Nothing from anywhere else on her mental list. To text from her friend Sarah, asking if she was okay. A separate message from Marcus at the diner. What he did was wrong. For what it's worth. She wrote back that it was worth something. She left Sarah's message for later. Sarah would want to talk, and Emily didn't have the energy yet. She was standing at the counter with her coffee when her phone rang. Roy Callahan. Saved in her contacts now. Morning, he said. You up? Yes. A pause. Wanted you to hear this from me, before you hear it another way. Some people are going to be at the cafe this morning. Emily set her cup down carefully. What do you mean? Some people. Brothers, Roy said. People who heard what happened and wanted to show up. Show up and do what? Eat breakfast. Spend some money at the diner. Just be there. She held the phone, trying to sort through what she was feeling, which was several things at once. Something moving through her chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anything else. Some overwhelming thing she didn't have a clean word for, and underneath it, the practical part of her brain that had been doing kitchen table math for 4 years, saying, this doesn't fix anything. This doesn't pay a single bill. This is a gesture. How many people? She asked. More than a few. Roy. Emily. His voice stayed level. Nobody's going to hurt anyone. Nobody's threatening anyone. It's people showing up. That's the whole thing. I don't want anyone getting in trouble because of Emmy. Nobody's getting in trouble. I don't want it to turn into something it isn't. I don't want anyone making it angry or it won't be, Roy said. I promise you that. She found herself trusting the certainty in his voice more than she expected to. Okay, she said. You should go. You should be there. It's not my diner anymore. Go anyway, Roy said. Sometimes you need to see a thing to understand it. After hanging up, she stood in the kitchen a while. Danny was still asleep. The house sat quiet around her. The same grey November light coming through the window. She thought of Richard Collins behind his desk, walking into a normal Tuesday with his single-cup coffee maker and his sign on the wall. Pleased with himself, the way certain people are pleased with themselves after enforcing a rule they believe in. She thought about what Roy had said. Sometimes you need to see a thing to understand it. She grabbed her jacket. She drove to the cafe, without calling ahead, without a plan, without knowing what exactly she'd do once she got there. She told herself she'd just park across the street and watch. Told herself she wasn't going inside, wasn't going to make it personal, wasn't going to hand Richard the satisfaction of watching her show up looking like she wanted something back. She left a note for Danny. Out for a bit, back by 10 and drove. The cafe sat about a mile and a half from the house. She drove it half on autopilot. The same familiar turns, Miller Street, the pothole by the church, the badly timed light at Cedar and Fifth. Then, turning onto the main road, she heard it before she saw it, a low, layered sound rolling in from a distance, not something you could pin down right away, but something that landed in your chest before your mind caught up to what it was. She slowed instinctively and looked ahead through the windshield, out past the gentle curve of road leading toward the cafe and the highway running alongside it. What she saw made her pull to the shoulder and stop. They were coming from the north, from several directions at once, visible now on the highway, converging on the approach into Red Valley with the calm, rolling inevitability of something already set loose and unable to be called back. Motorcycles, not a handful, not a dozen, more than she could count from where she sat, a line stretching back along the highway further than she could see clearly. Headlights in the early grey light, a slow-moving constellation. She sat with her hands on the wheel and watched them come. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. Jack wants you to know he's riding at the front. She looked up from the phone. As the lead riders rounded the curve toward the cafe, she could see there were far more of them than even Roy's more than a few had prepared her for. They rolled in a loose formation that tightened naturally as the road narrowed near the cafe, then parked in a pattern somehow both spontaneous and orderly, the kind of parking that comes from men who've done this 100 times, each one finding a space without anyone directing traffic, the whole thing settling itself without any chaos at all. She counted until counting stopped mattering. At least 200. She sat across the street and slightly down the road, watching them climb off their bikes with the unhurried ease of men, comfortable in their own skin and clear on their purpose, watching them cluster and talk, nothing agitated about it, nothing aggressive, just men who'd ridden through the early morning to be somewhere. She spotted Jack near the front, talking to a tall, heavy-set man in a similar vest. His back was to her. He didn't know she was there yet. She saw Richard Collins appear behind the cafe's front glass. She couldn't make out his face clearly from this distance, but she could read his posture. That specific freeze a body does when it runs into something wildly outside anything it prepared for. He stood dead still at the window. Her phone rang. Jack, where are you? Down the street. In my car. Come here. I don't think. Emily, not impatient, not demanding, just clear. The way certain things are just clear. We didn't come here for the diner. We came here for you. Come here. She held the phone a moment. Okay. She parked, got out, and walked toward the cafe. As she came down the sidewalk, a few men near the edge of the crowd noticed her, and recognition rippled quietly through the group. No fanfare, no performance, and they made room. The way people naturally clear space for whoever belongs at the center of something. Jack met her at the crowd's edge. He looked better than yesterday morning. The rest had done him good. Color back in his face. The careful bracing gone from how he held himself. He looked at her with that same directness from the parking lot. "You made it," Roy called, said to come. Roy's right about most things. He looked out over the group, 200 men, and a handful of women riders who'd traveled hours through November cold, set alarms, rearranged their lives, climbed onto bikes in the dark because a message had traveled the network saying someone worth being seen was in Red Valley, and that seeing her mattered. These people, Jack said, came for one reason. Because you treated a stranger like a person when you didn't have to, and it cost you something. That's the whole of it. Emily looked out at the crowd, fighting something, a tightness in her throat, pressure building behind her eyes. She wasn't going to let win, not out here. She pressed her lips together and breathed. "I don't know what to say," she said. "You don't have to say anything," Jack said. "That's kind of the point." Through the glass, Richard Collins hadn't moved from the window. She could see his expression clearly now, and it wasn't what she'd braced for. Not anger, not the stubborn look of a man doubling down. Something more complicated. Something he was going to need time to process. She recognized it, because she'd worn that same look herself at certain points in her life. The look of someone whose whole model of the world just collided with something it never accounted for. A big man near the front door, 50s, trimmed white beard, vest heavy with patches, turned to the group and called out, loud enough to carry, "We eating or what?" And just like that, the group started moving. They filed into the cafe unhurried and orderly. People who knew they had time and weren't trying to make a point with their speed. They filled every booth, every stall, every table by the windows. Those who couldn't fit waited outside, patient about it. They ordered coffee, eggs, pancakes, whatever the morning menu had. They paid, they tipped well, and they were courteous to every server in the building. In a way that said something without needing to spell it out. Emily stood outside beside Jack, watching. "What does this actually change?" she said. "The job, the bills, one thing at a time," Jack said. "That's easy to say, I know." He glanced sideways at her. "But here's what I know about who owns this place. Man named Michael Bennett, not Richard Collins. And right now, Michael Bennett is getting a phone call from someone he trusts, telling him to come see what's happened to his cafe in the last 20 minutes. A pause. Some things take care of themselves once enough people are watching. "You know the owner." "I know people who know people," Jack said. "That's how this works." She didn't answer right away. She was watching a man in his 70s, grey ponytail, arthritic hands moving carefully around a coffee cup, leather vest that had clearly seen 50 years of road, sit at the counter of the Silver Oak Cafe and order breakfast with the quiet dignity of someone who'd been told his whole life that places like this weren't built for him, and had decided this particular morning to disagree. She thought of her father. She thought of what he used to tell her, a thing she'd carried since childhood, and never found reason to revise. A person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by how they treat someone who has nothing. Her father had been a quiet man who believed in showing up and doing right, without needing an audience for it. He would have understood exactly what was happening here this morning. She thought she understood it too. "Now, Jack," she said, "I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Yesterday, when you walked into the diner, did you know any of this was going to happen?" He shook his head. "No. When you said what you said in the parking lot, I meant it," he said. "But I didn't have a plan. I just knew it wasn't right. And I knew it wasn't going to be the end of the story." "How'd you know that?" He thought about it. "Because things like what you did don't just vanish," he said. "They move. They go somewhere. Might not always be 200 bikes on a Tuesday morning, but it goes somewhere." He looked at her. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I think so. You did something real," he said. "Real things leave a mark. That's the whole of it." She nodded. Glancing at the window Richard had been standing in, empty now. She didn't know where he'd gone or what was running through his head. And to her mild surprise, she found she didn't especially need to know. What she was watching wasn't really about Richard Collins. It never had been. It was something simpler and older. The way one decent act ripples through a network of people who'd maybe been waiting, without even knowing it, for something true to hold on to. 200 people had ridden through the November dark on the strength of one story about a woman who gave a stranger some water. That meant something she didn't have words for yet, but could already feel in the place you feel things before you've found language for them. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Miss Carter. A man's voice, older, careful with his words. My name's Michael Bennett. I own the Silver Oak Cafe. Emily went still. I'm standing in my own parking lot right now, Michael Bennett said. And I've just been told what happened here yesterday morning. I'd like to talk to you, if you're willing. A pause. And before we do, I want you to know, I'm sorry. Sorry for what happened. And sorry it took 200 people showing up in a parking lot before I heard about it. Emily glanced at Jack. He was watching her, nothing triumphant in his face. Nothing that said, asterisk, I told you so, asterisk. Nothing turning this into a story about himself. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man glad to be standing in the right place at the right time. Where are you parked? She said into the phone. Michael Bennett sat in a silver pickup at the far end of the lot. And the moment Emily approached, she knew immediately he wasn't the man she'd been steeling herself for. She'd built an image of him in her head from the second she'd heard his name, the owner, the man above Richard, the one who could have known and hadn't, who could have set a different tone for the whole place and clearly hadn't done that either. She'd expected someone smoother, better dressed, fluent in corporate distance. Instead, she found a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and the jacket that had seen better years, sitting in a truck with a cracked dashboard, a child's soccer cleat on the passenger seat, and a gas station coffee in the queue folder. He climbed out when he saw her, coming, and stood by the truck with an expression she recognized because she'd worn it herself, the look of someone who knows they owe a debt and isn't sure it can actually be repaid. Emily. Carter, Mr. Bennett, Mike. He glanced past her at the crowded lot, the line of men still waiting for seats, then back at her. How long's your brother been in the chair? That wasn't the opener she'd expected. 4 years. And you've been here too. So, you took this job after the accident? Yes, he nodded slowly. I pulled your file this morning before I drove over. I know that sounds strange. I didn't need to understand yesterday. The calls already told me that. I wanted to understand you. He held her gaze steadily. 2 years. And you've never called out sick without arranging coverage first. 0 complaints. 11 commendations from customers. I didn't even know we had a commendation file until I went digging. You trained to new hires. Covered 16 shifts for co-workers with emergencies. He stopped. Richard never once mentioned any of that to me. Emily didn't say anything. He told me you could be difficult, Michael said. That you had a habit of making your own calls. I give people water when they're thirsty, Emily said. That's probably the call he means. Something flickered across Michael's face, close to a smile, gone as quickly as it came. He's worked for me 6 years, never stolen a dime, keeps clean books, runs a tight operation. He paused, choosing honesty over diplomacy. She could see him do it. He's also someone who confuses running a tight ship with running a cold one. And I let it slide because I was watching the numbers instead of watching my own place. That one's on you, Emily said, not to wound him, just because it was true. And he seemed like a man who wanted truth more than comfort. He took it without flinching. Yes, it is. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and studied the ground a moment. I'd like to offer you your job back. I figured you would. He looked up. Jack, he said something was going to shift. Didn't say what. Michael nodded. The job I'm offering isn't the one you had. I want you in a different role. Assistant manager, to start, with a real path forward, and none of it running through Richard Collins's approval. Because Richard Collins won't be making calls about your future anymore. What happens to Richard? We're going to have a very direct conversation today, Michael said. There will be changes. He met her eyes. I'm not going to pretend the last 2 years were handled the way they should have been. I can't hand you those 2 years back. What I can change is what comes next. She was quiet a bit, thinking about the bills at home, about Danny's appointment, about the very concrete reality of needing income and what this offer meant in real terms. And underneath that, the harder question, whether she wanted to go back to a place that had humiliated her, whether whatever was being offered made that worth doing, whether this was the start of something genuine or just pressure relief that would evaporate once the bikes left. I need to know something, she said. What happens in 6 months? When this morning's just a story people tell and the news vans are gone, and it's just another Tuesday. What actually changes then? Michael took the question seriously. She could tell by how he sat with it instead of rushing to reassure her. I don't have a perfect answer, he said. I can tell you what I intend. I can tell you I'll be paying attention in ways I wasn't before. But you're right that intention and follow through aren't the same thing. And you've got no reason to just take my word for it. No, she said. I don't. Then take a trial. 30 days. Come back at the new title, the new pay, a direct line to me. Not through Richard. Straight to me. At the end of 30 days, you decide. No pressure, no strings. If it's not what I said it would be, you walk. No argument from me. And a reference that says you're the best employee I've had in 10 years, he paused. Because that would be true. She looked at him, then at the cafe, then at Jack, standing near the door talking with the white-bearded man from earlier, deliberately not watching her, giving her the privacy of the moment. Okay, she said. 30 days, Michael exhaled, not dramatically, but she caught the release of something he'd been holding. Thank you, he said. And Emily, I am genuinely sorry, not just for what happened, for the culture that let it happen, that one's mind too fix. She nodded and turned back toward the cafe. She'd barely gone 4 steps when the front door opened and Richard Collins walked out. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. The moment stretched maybe 3 seconds and covered enormous ground. Richard looked smaller. That was the word that came to her, and she didn't think it with any pleasure, just accuracy. The practiced authority had drained out of his posture. He looked like a man who'd stood at his front window for the last 45 minutes watching 200 people he'd never imagined show up and fill his cafe, and had spent those 45 minutes doing some very rapid recalculating about how yesterday had actually gone. Emily, he said. Richard. He opened his mouth. She watched an apology start assembling itself across his face. That particular arrangement a person's features take when they're building the words they think they're supposed to say. She waited. When the silence stretched long enough to make clear he wasn't finding it on his own, she said, You don't have to do this right now. Something like relief crossed his face, mixed with something harder. I owe you one, he said. You do, she said. But right now the coffee inside's probably getting cold. And those men waited a long time to get here. She walked past him and into the cafe. The sound hit her first, not loud, not rowdy, but full. 100 conversations layered together. The clink of cups, chairs scraping, the particular aliveness of a room full of people who were actually present instead of just passing through. The silver oak had a sound she'd never heard from it before. Warmth that had nothing to do with the heater and everything to do with the fact that it was genuinely, completely full of people who'd chosen to be there. Every seat taken, every booth occupied. 3 servers, she knew, from her own shifts weaving between tables with the slightly stunned efficiency of people handling more than they'd expected, but managing it fine. Helped by customers who were plainly patient because they hadn't come here to be served quickly. They'd come for something else entirely. The white-bearded man at the counter. She'd since learned his name was Earl, that he'd ridden in from Fresno, spent 30 years as a machinist before retiring, and still did volunteer work for veterans out of his garage, swiveled on his stool when the door opened. saw her, and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "There she is." Not a spotlight moment, not an announcement, just a plain acknowledgement that the right person had walked in. But it moved through the room like a wave, heads turning, men nodding, a few raising their cups in a gesture that needed no words behind it. Emily stood just inside the door and took a breath, held it a second. She'd never been someone who liked being the center of things. Most of her adult life had been spent being efficient, useful, and largely invisible, partly by nature, partly by the demands of the work, partly by the specific texture of a life where the practical always crowded out the personal. She didn't quite know how to receive whatever was being offered in this room. Wasn't sure she'd earned it. Jack sat at a table near the center. He caught her eye, tilted his head toward the empty chair across from him. She crossed and sat. "How'd it go?" 30 days, she said. "New title." He nodded once. "He tell you?" "He told Roy. Roy told me an hour ago. Before he even called you." Jack wrapped both hands around his mug. "Michael Bennett's a decent man who got complacent. That's different from Richard. A man with a very particular view of the world that doesn't leave much room for people who don't look a certain way." "What happens to Richard?" Jack shrugged. "Between him and Michael. But here's what I think." He looked at her. "I think Richard Collins is going to spend the next few weeks deeply uncomfortable, and then adjust his understanding of a few things. People like him usually do, once the course gets high enough. Whether that adjustment's real or just behavior management to dodge consequences, that's his business. Point is, you don't have to worry about it." She looked around the cafe. Earl at the counter, the men filling booths, servers threading between tables, the whole improbable scene of it. "Jack, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Yesterday, when you walked into the diner, before anything happened, what were you expecting?" He weighed the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I was expecting to be left alone until I felt good enough to leave. That's usually how it goes. You learn not to expect much more." "Does that bother you?" "Used to. Now it just is what it is. Eventually you stop needing people to see you a certain way. You just need them to leave you room to be what you are." He looked at her. "You did more than that. I gave you water and eggs. You gave them without conditions," he said. "That's rarer than it should be." She thought of her father again. The specific quality of his decency. Unconditional. Exactly that. He'd help people without running a calculation first. He'd learned it from his own father, and she'd learned it from him, and she'd always thought of it simply as a way of being she'd inherited rather than a choice she made fresh every time. Hearing Jack call it rare made her see, for the first time, that maybe it really was, that her father's particular gift, that instinct for treating people without conditions, hadn't just passed down to her, but had somehow survived intact in a world with 1,000 daily reasons to wear it down. Something shifted in her chest. Not grief exactly, gratitude, maybe, for her father, for what he'd given her, for the fact that losing a job and shaking in a car afterward hadn't managed to take it away. Marcus appeared at the table, clearly having come out specifically to find her. No order pad, no obvious reason to be on the floor. "Hey," he said, quiet. He was mid-30s, careful in the way people get when they've learned young to read a room. "I'm glad you're back in here," he said. "I don't know if I'm back," Emily said. "I know, but I'm glad you're in here." Jack glanced between them. "This the guy who made the eggs?" "Yeah," Emily said. Jack turned to Marcus. "Best eggs I've had in years." Marcus looked at him a beat. "I'll let the cook know it's appreciated," and went back to the kitchen. Emily almost laughed. Almost. The pressure behind her eyes hadn't gone anywhere, and she was holding it back purely on habit. At this point her phone buzzed. "Danny, *, where are you?" * then. 30 seconds later. * I looked out the window. "Is that a news van?" * She looked up sharply, turned toward the front glass. Parked across the street sat a white van with a local station's logo. A woman in a coat standing beside it. A man beside her with a camera, both looking at the cafe. "There's press," she said. Jack glanced over. His expression barely moved. Word gets around. Small town. 200 bikes on a Tuesday morning. That's a story, whether you want it to be or not. I don't want it to be, Emily said. Stomach tightening. She hadn't thought this far ahead. She'd been so wrapped up in the internal reality of the morning, Michael's offer, the room around her, that she hadn't considered the external version, the segment that would run on the evening news, the version where her face got attached to a story she no longer controlled. You don't have to talk to them, Jack said. What if they turn it into something it isn't? What if they make it about the club, about bikers showing up to make a point, instead of about, she stopped. I don't want the people in this room turned into some threatening story. That's the easy version. That's what people jump to. Jack looked at her a long moment, and the expression on his face. She'd remember this later as one of the moments from the whole day she held on to tightest. Wasn't surprise. It was closer to confirmation, like she'd said something he'd already suspected, and was glad to have verified. You're worried about us, he said. Right now. In this exact moment, you're worried about us. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. Okay, he said, and stood. A big man standing, and the room didn't ripple around him. No performance in it. But people noticed anyway. Earl noticed. The men in the corner booth noticed. Information moved through the room, the quiet way. It moved through this particular group. Jack walked outside and crossed the sidewalk toward the news van. Emily watched through the glass as the woman with the microphone spotted him coming, straightened, and stepped forward to meet him. Jack talked for about 4 minutes, calm, measured, unhurried, not gesturing much, looking straight at the woman the whole time. At one point he said something that made her pause with her pen against the notepad, then write quickly, like he'd handed her something she hadn't expected and needed to catch before it slipped away. Roy appeared at Emily's shoulder. She hadn't heard him approach. Quieter in person than his phone voice suggested. Compact, efficient in his movements, grey moustache, watchful eyes, the air of a man who processed things thoroughly before acting. He's telling them the real story, Roy said. Not the one they showed up for. What version did they show up for? The one where we're the spectacle, Roy said. 200 bikers descend on a diner. That's a visual. That's easy. Harder version's the real one. A young woman showed basic decency to a stranger. It cost her something, and people heard and wanted to be here. He watched Jack through the glass. That one's not as easy to film, but it's the only one that's actually true. How does Jack know how to do that? Roy smiled, brief but real. Because he spent his whole life being the wrong version of the story, and he got sick of it. Jack came back in, sat down, picked up his cold coffee, and drank it anyway. What did you tell them? Emily asked. Told them why we came, he said. Told them about you. What you did. What it cost you. Told them what we are and what we aren't. Told them that if they film it honestly, they've got a story about a community doing what a community's supposed to do. He paused. If they film it dishonestly, that's on them, not us. We know why we're here. The morning kept rolling forward. Tables turned over. More food came out. Someone paid for the table beside them before the people at it could grab their own check. And that table turned around and paid for the one behind them. At some point, the servers told Emily nobody could manage to pay for their own meal. Someone else always got there first. She circulated through the room. Earl told her about his granddaughter, studying to be a nurse, who'd, he said with proud certainty, had Emily's exact hair color and something similar in her eyes. She met Dario, a Riverside rider who taught high school history during the week and had ridden 4 hours in the cold that morning because, as he put it without a shred of self-consciousness, some things mattered more than sleep. She met Patricia, only the second woman she'd encountered in the group. 60s, close-cropped silver hair, a vest as decorated as anyone's, who'd driven instead of ridden thanks to a knee surgery 3 months back, and who told Emily, with a directness Emily appreciated, that she'd already spoken to a friend about an opening at a medical center in the county. If Emily wanted it, I'm trying the 30 days here first, Emily said. Good, Patricia said. but the offer stands. By 11, the cafe had turned over twice. The news van had shot its segment and left. 3 townspeople, not riders, just locals who'd heard something was happening, had come in for coffee and stayed far longer than planned, chatting easily with strangers at the counter the way people talk when they've been handed a reason to feel like they're all on the same side of something. Richard Collins never reappeared on the floor. Emily was behind the counter, helping. They were short-staffed, and she knew the place better than anyone. When Marcus came out with a plate she hadn't asked for and set it down in front of the empty stall beside her. Sit, eat something. She looked at it. Eggs, toast, the same thing she'd ordered for Jack 2 mornings ago. Marcus, I'm fine. You haven't eaten since you got here. Sit down and eat. Or I'm going to stand here and watch you until you do. And neither of us is going to enjoy that. She sat. She ate. It was the first real food she'd had since that granola bar 2 mornings back. Though she didn't say that part out loud, Marcus seemed to know anyway, from the way she ate. And he refilled her coffee without a word and left it there. Jack sat down beside her. How's your side? Better, he said. Need to see a doctor when I get home. But better. Will you actually go? He gave her a look. Probably. Jack. Most likely. Yes. He picked up Earl's abandoned mug of coffee. Emily, I need to tell you something. She set her fork down. Something in his voice had shifted. Not heavier, but carrying more weight than the morning had held up until now. Okay, there are people in this room who've been doing this a long time, he said. Riding, working, building things. More experience than I've got. More connections. A better sense of the long game. He paused. Some conversations have happened this morning that I didn't start. Between people who trust each other and have resources I personally don't. She looked at him carefully. What kind of conversations? Your brother's medical bills, Jack said. There's a veterans network that runs medical fundraising. Not just for veterans. They expanded it 2 years ago. Roy knows the man who runs it. They've been talking. Emily went very still. There's also, Jack said, a woman named Patricia. I think you met her. She mentioned the medical center job. She also knows a non-profit that helps families with long-term care costs. Not charity, he added quickly, catching something in her face. It's a fund built from donations, specifically for situations like your brother's. You'd apply, get considered like anyone else, but the application takes about 20 minutes. And Roy says the turnaround's fast. She pressed her lips together, looked at the counter, at her plate, at the worn spot on the counter she'd wiped down 10,000 times over 2 years. This is too much. No, Jack said. It isn't. I didn't do this for a reward. I don't want, Emily. His voice held both patience and firmness. Do you know why I ride with the Brotherhood? She shook her head. Because when I was 23 and had nothing, and my mother was sick, and I had no idea how to ask anybody for help, he said. A man I barely knew showed up at my door with a check and a list of resources, and said exactly what I'm saying to you right now. He held her gaze. This isn't charity. This is what people do for each other. This is what a community is. You let people help you when it's offered, because someday you're the one showing up at somebody else's door. He paused. That man saved my life. Not dramatically, practically. He made it possible for me to survive what I was in the middle of. I've been showing up at other people's doors ever since. She looked at him a long time. The pressure behind her eyes had built 4 hours now, and was getting harder to hold back. I don't know how to do this, she said. Receiving things. I don't know how. I know, Jack said. Most people who are good at giving have no idea how to receive. That's usually how it works. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth a second. Danny's going to have his appointment, she said. Not a question, just saying it to make it real. Because something that had sat like a boulder in her chest for weeks was finally shifting. Yes, Jack said. And the mortgage? Roy knows a financial counselor who works pro bono. I can get you the number. She looked at him. You people. She didn't finish the sentence. Because she didn't have one to finish. Yeah, Jack said, gently, understanding exactly what she'd been trying to say. and that it was fine, she hadn't managed it. The door opened. Emily looked up on reflex. Michael Bennett walked in, still in the same flannel jacket, still carrying the gas station coffee cup despite perfectly good coffee, sitting inside his own building, which told her something, that he'd been standing outside working up to this rather than striding in like he owned the place, and was honest enough to carry the evidence of it in with him. He looked around the room, the full tables, servers moving with purpose, the men at the counter, the whole warm, unfamiliar texture of a room genuinely alive from maybe the first time. Something moved across his face as he took it in. He made his way over and sat on the stool on Emily's other side, set his cup down, and said quietly, "I've owned this place 10 years. I know," Emily said. "Never seen it like this." She looked around, thinking about what he meant, not just the number of people, but the quality of it, the fact that everyone in the room had chosen to come, that something had pulled them here, that the story of what had happened had traveled through people, and those people had decided it mattered. "I know," she said again. Michael looked at her. "What do I need to do differently, day to day?" "Not the policy stuff. I'll handle that. I mean underneath the policies. What actually needs to happen here that hasn't been happening?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected corporate framing, management speak. Instead, he was asking her to diagnose what was broken and how to fix it, and asking like he genuinely expected a real answer. She thought about it. "Treat the staff like people," she said, "not assets. Know their names. Know what they're dealing with outside these walls. Not because it's good for morale, but because it's human. Know that Marcus's mother had surgery last month, and he's been sending money home. Know that Jenny's been fighting a custody battle for 6 months, and some mornings she's held together with tape. Not so you can manage it, so you understand what it costs people to show up here every single day." She paused. "And trust your staff's judgment. When somebody needs a glass of water, let them get the glass of water. When somebody needs 5 minutes, give them 5 minutes. You hired people who know how to do this work. Let them do it." Michael sat with that a moment. "Okay," he said finally. "That's it. I need to actually think it through properly," he said. "But the right first answer to a direct question is okay." He looked at her. "So, okay," she nodded, looking around the cafe one more time. The room that had been cold 2 mornings ago, now warm, full of men who'd ridden through the dark, because something true had moved through them, and they'd followed it here. She thought of her father, of Danny at home, of the bills on the table still there, but somehow no longer something she was facing alone. She thought of Jack's words. Real things leave a mark. She hadn't understood. Handing a stranger a glass of water. That she was doing anything that would outlast that single morning. She'd done it because it was simply what you did, because her father had taught her that, because the man needed it and she had it. And there was no version of the world where you didn't close that gap. But it had lasted. It had traveled. It had moved through a network of human connections she'd never known existed and come back around to her in a shape she never could have predicted, and brought with it things she'd carried alone for years. She was sitting in the middle of the evidence right now, proof of what one true thing could do once it found the right people. Her phone buzzed. "Danny again. M. There's a news story on the local station. They're talking about you. You're on TV. She typed back. Is it a good story? 3 dots. Then, yeah, really is. Come home soon. I want to hear the whole thing. She set the phone down. Earl, 2 seats over, asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said. Then, because it was true, and because saying true things out loud was going to become a habit now, "Actually, yeah, I think it really is." She drove home at noon with the windows down despite the cold, needing the feel of November against her face, needing the ordinary rhythm of the town rolling past, the church on Miller Street, the light at Cedar and Fifth catching people the same as always, a route so familiar it lived in her body rather than her memory. She needed proof the ordinary world was still there, because the morning had strayed so far outside it that she kept feeling the urge to check. Danny was waiting near the door, not hovering. He wasn't a hoverer. Too much self-possession for that. But positioned close enough to the entrance that it was clear he'd been watching for her car for a while. He looked at her face with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent 4 years reading expressions in place of 100 other things he couldn't do. You look like somebody turned you inside out, he said. Pretty. Accurate. Sit down. I'm fine. He said, mimicking the exact tone she used on him when he was pushing through pain and pretending otherwise. Sit down. She sat at the kitchen table. He wheeled to the counter, put the kettle on, a skill he'd taught himself with months of stubborn practice, and made 2 cups of tea, carrying them over with the practiced efficiency of someone determined not to let limitation define what he had to offer. Tell me, he said. She told him everything. Michael Bennett in the parking lot, the 30-day offer, the new title, Roy and Patricia, and the long-term care fund, Jack's story about the man who'd shown up at his door at 23, the cafe full of riders paying each other's tabs, Marcus forcing her to eat, the news van, Earl and his granddaughter with Emily's hair. Danny listened all the way through without interrupting once, which was remarkable, since he generally had opinions about everything and rarely held on to them. He listened, tea untouched, eyes on her face. When she finished, there was 10 seconds of silence. The care fund, you're going to apply today. He nodded slowly, sipped his tea, looked down at the kitchen table, at the bills still sitting there in their neat stacks, the system she'd built, because it was the only control she had over something uncontrollable. I know you don't want to talk about this, he said, but I need to say it once, and then I won't again. Okay, I know what these 4 years have cost you, he said. Not the money, the other kind. The things you didn't do, put down and never picked back up because there wasn't time or money or space. Whatever plans you had before the accident that you just quietly folded away and never mentioned again. He held her gaze. I need you to know that I know, and that I'm sorry, and that none of what happened today changes what I owe you. But I hope some of it gives you a little more room. She pressed her mouth shut hard. Danny, I'm done, he said. That's the once. I'm done. She reached across and covered his hand with hers, and neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything adequate. And they'd sat inside moments like this before, moments where the thing between them outsized language, and they both knew how to just be in them without filling the space unnecessarily. After a while she said, I start the 30 days tomorrow. Good. And I'm applying for the care fund tonight. Good. And I'm calling Sarah back. He gave her the closest thing he had to a mischievous look. Sarah's going to lose it. I know. She's going to absolutely explode. He smiled, his real smile, the one that mirrored their father's, the one that transformed his whole face. I missed this, he said. She frowned. Missed what? I was gone 4 hours. You being okay? He said simply. I missed you being okay. She didn't have an answer for that. She just squeezed his hand once more and got up to make lunch. The kitchen was warm. The bills were still there. The world was every bit as complicated as it had been that morning, but something had shifted in the air of the room, some change in pressure neither of them needed to name, and it was enough that they could both feel it. The next morning, Emily Carter walked back into the Silver Oak Cafe as assistant manager. The role was real, not ceremonial, not the same job wearing a new label. Michael had spent the previous afternoon restructuring, and what she found on arrival was a staff meeting already underway. Michael at the head with a notepad, and a chair left open beside him, clearly hers. She sat down. She didn't look toward Richard Collins, seated at the far end, whose presence she'd been told to expect, and who somehow seemed physically smaller in the room than he had 2 days earlier. Michael ran the meeting. He laid out changes, some immediate, some phased. A new staff feedback line, direct to him. A customer dignity policy, read aloud from a printed page, stating in plain and ambiguous terms that every customer be served with equal respect regardless of appearance, attire, or perceived income, and that any staff member, regardless of rank, who saw that policy violated by anyone, including a superior, was authorized to bring it straight to the owner, with zero risk of retaliation. He read it twice. He looked at Richard when he finished. Richard studied the table. Questions, Michael said. Nobody had any. The room carried the specific weight of a space where something had just been said that everyone understood, not just the words, but what stood behind them, and everyone was quietly processing it in their own time. Emily, anything to add? She'd thought about this, spent part of the night working out what her first day should look like, how to walk back into a place that had fired her, how to hold authority that had been denied her 2 days earlier, how to work beside Richard Collins without pretending nothing happened or weaponizing the fact that it had. Just one thing, she said. We're not spending energy revisiting 2 days ago. We all know what happened. Going forward, I want the focus on the staff, not the policy. Mike's got the policy handled. I want to know how each of you is actually doing. I'll be setting up 10-minute check-ins with everyone this week. Not to manage you, just to know, she paused. Because I've worked this floor, I know what it costs. Everyone in this room has things happening outside these walls, and the least we can do is know about them. The room sat quiet a beat. Then Jenny from Thursdays asked, when do I get my 10 minutes? Something loosened in the room. How's Tuesday? Emily said, and the morning genuinely started. She worked harder that day than she had in a long time, partly because the role demanded it, and partly because she was proving something, not to Richard, whose opinion of her had been rendered irrelevant by events, but to herself, confirming she was who she believed she was. That the morning with Jack, the conversation with Michael, everything she'd said to Danny and everything he'd said back, all of it was real, was actually her, and not some version of herself that only surfaced during a crisis. She discovered she was good at the new role in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd always been good at the work itself, the serving, the rhythm of a shift, the physical fluency of a waitress who knows her station cold. Managing was different, and she found instincts for it she hadn't known she had. She noticed things. She noticed the new hire, a 22-year-old named Carl, 3 weeks into training, technically solid, but with a tell. When overwhelmed, he smiled too much, too fast. A social defense that meant he was drowning and didn't want it to show. She pulled him aside at 10:30. You're doing fine. What's the hardest part right now? Carl looked surprised, then relieved. Table turn over during rush. Can't find the rhythm. Walk with me. She worked it alongside him, not lecturing, but narrating what she noticed, which tables were ready to turn. How to move between stations without crossing paths. The small choreography of a busy floor that looked chaotic from outside, but wasn't. By 11, he had it, not perfectly, but enough. Marcus caught her eye through the kitchen window and gave her a single slow nod. At 1 o'clock, Richard Collins knocked on the office door, Michael's office, which he'd told her to use whenever he wasn't in. She was working the schedule. She looked up. I have something to say, Richard said. Okay, he stepped in, shut the door behind him, which she didn't love but allowed. He stood in front of the desk with the look of a man who'd been rehearsing this, working through its architecture in advance. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not the kind I'd give because Michael told me to. He stopped, started again. I made a judgment based on what a man looked like. I called it a business decision. It wasn't. It was a judgment, and it was wrong. And the way I treated you when you disagreed with it, that was wrong too. Not just bad management, wrong. He repeated the word, like he needed it to land properly. I don't expect you to be fine with what I did. I just need you to know that I know what I did. Emily looked at him, thinking of what Jack had said, that whatever adjustment Richard made might be real, or might just be recalibration to avoid consequences, and that either way, it wasn't really her business to sort out. Looking at him now, though, she was inclined to believe this was more than performance, that 2 days confronting the consequences of his own judgment had genuinely shifted something in him, not just his behavior but his understanding. She might be wrong. Time would tell, I accept your apology, she said. And I want to be clear. I'm not carrying what happened forward into how we work together. If you need something, come to me. If I need something from you, I'll come to you. We can be professional about this, he nodded, looking like a man braced for something harder, unsure what to do now that it hadn't come. Thank you, he said. Richard, she held his gaze. Next time someone walks through that door who doesn't look like the customer you're expecting, what do you do? He was quiet a moment. Get them water. She nodded once. Good. The first week passed, then the second, and Emily began to understand what Michael had meant about changing the culture rather than just the policy. Culture didn't shift in a week. It shifted in accumulated small moments. The check-in with Jenny that revealed her custody situation was worse than anyone knew, followed by a conversation with Michael that produced a modified schedule, giving Jenny the flexibility she needed. The staff lunch Emily organized, just an hour, just people eating together in back, that started awkward and ended with Carl telling a story about his grandmother that had everyone genuinely laughing. The morning she arrived to find Marcus had taped a handwritten sign to the kitchen window. Asterisk if you see it, fix it. If you can't fix it, say something. Asterisk she left it exactly where it was. Day 30 landed on a Wednesday. Michael called her into the office late afternoon, once the lunch rush had settled, and the cafe had eased into its mid-afternoon quiet. He sat across from her with a folder on the desk between them. 30 days, she said. How do you feel? She weighed the question honestly. Like this is the job I should have had 2 years ago. And like the last 2 years weren't wasted, because they taught me things I use every day. And like I want to keep going. He opened the folder. Then let's talk about what that looks like. What it looked like was a full management contract. Not assistant, manager. Richard Collins was moving into a back-of-house administrative role by his own request. A transition that had been quietly handled over the previous 2 weeks. Mutual. Documented. No drama. Which surprised Emily until Michael explained Richard had asked for the change himself. Said he thought he was better suited to systems than people. Michael said, I think he's right. Took him a while to figure that out. The contract was fair, the salary real, not extravagant by any outside measure, but enough. Enough for the bills. Enough for Danny's appointments. Enough for the breathing room she'd been reaching toward for 4 years. The care fund had come through the week before. Patricia's network had moved faster than she'd expected, and while it wasn't everything, it was substantial enough to make Danny's next 6 months of treatment manageable in a way it never had been before. She signed the contract. Michael shook her hand across the desk with the seriousness of a real commitment. Don't let me get complacent again. I won't, she said. I promise you that. She called Jack that evening. He picked up on the second ring, unhurried, like he'd been expecting the call, and was glad it had come. Manager, she said. No preamble, a pause. She could hear in the silence a man deciding how much to let himself feel. Tell me, he said. She told him the contract, the salary, the care fund, what 30 days had turned into, Richard's request to move into administration, and what it said about him that he'd asked instead of being told. Jack listened all the way through. When she finished, your brother no. Danny cried, she said, which he'll kill me for telling you. I won't tell anyone. A beat. He cried. Good, Jack said, and in that single word she heard 30 years of a man who'd learned the hard way that receiving something gracefully was its own kind of strength. Glad that Danny had managed it without the fight Emily herself had put up in a cafe parking lot to mornings, and a lifetime ago. How's your side? She asked. Went to the doctor, he said. Old injury. Nothing new broken. Gave me something for the inflammation. Told me to rest, which I'm actively working on. Are you, though? Went for a short ride today. That's basically resting. She laughed, surprised by how easily it came. How the conversation felt like she'd known him 4 years, rather than the 5 weeks it had actually been since he'd stumbled through the Silver Oaks door struggling to breathe. Jack, she said. Can I ask you something? You're going to ask it either way. Go ahead. That morning, when I helped you, was there some part of you testing it? Walking in expecting the usual, watching to see if I'd be different. The question sat in silence long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. Probably, Jack finally said. Not consciously, but probably. And when I was different, it felt like. His voice carried that particular care she'd learned, meant he was reaching for the true thing instead of the easier one nearby. You know how something can be a certain way so long you forget it was ever different. And then briefly it's different again. And you remember it used to be that. She sat with that. My dad was like that with people, she said. Treated everyone the same. Didn't run a calculation first. Sounds like someone worth being like. Yeah, she said. He was. Another silence. Comfortable this time. The kind that belongs to people who found, without planning it, that they've told each other things they don't usually tell anyone. I'll be back in Red Valley in a few weeks, Jack said. Veterans event the chapter's helping run. Roy mentioned it's near your part of town. You should come by the cafe. Was planning on it. Want to see what you've done with the place, she smiled, looking around her kitchen. The table with its bills, thinner now, more manageable, some crossed off after 4 years of stacking up. Danny's sweatshirt draped over a chair. The dark November window pressing in. It looks different, she said. Feels different. Can't quite explain it. Don't need to, Jack said. I'll see it when I get there. After they hung up, she sat a while at the kitchen table, thinking about the woman she'd been 6 weeks earlier, standing in the Silver Oaks parking lot, palms flat against her knees, shaking off leftover adrenaline, running electric bills and co-pays through her head, wondering if doing the right thing was a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought about everything that had moved through the world since then. The phone calls, the riders in the dark, the parking lot conversation with Michael, the 30 days, the contract with her name on it now sitting in an office drawer, Patricia's network, Roy's connections, the care fund, Danny crying, which she was never going to fully get over. She thought about one glass of water. She thought of her father's voice. A person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by how they treat someone who has nothing. She'd been 9 years old and thought she understood it. She understood it better now. Real things leave a mark. Jack had said it simply, the way true things get said. No decoration needed. She was living inside the mark that one true thing had made. She could feel its shape all around her. The transformed cafe, the signed contract, the brothers who'd ridden through the November dark, the man with the grey beard and tired eyes who'd walked through a door expecting nothing, and found someone who'd decided without hesitation that he was worth a glass of water. She didn't think she was special. That mattered most to her. She genuinely didn't see what she'd done as extraordinary. She'd done what she was taught. She'd followed her father's voice in a small, daily moment that had no audience, generated no consequences, wasn't recorded or shared anywhere. She'd done it because it was a Tuesday, and the man needed water, and she had water, and that was simply that. But sitting in her kitchen in November, with the bills thinning on the table, her brother asleep down the hall, a contract in a drawer, and a whole network of people she'd never imagined existing now woven into the fabric of her ordinary life. She was starting to understand that ordinary decency, practiced consistently, without calculation, without an audience, wasn't ordinary at all. Most people never got to experience it, not from a stranger, not offered with both hands, no conditions, no expectation of anything back. When you did experience it, it changed something, and the change moved. Her phone buzzed one more time before bed. A text from an unfamiliar number, 661 area code, somewhere in the Central Valley. Hi Emily. My name's Carmen. I ride with a chapter out of Bakersfield. Roy told me what happened. I'm a nurse. I do pro bono home visits for PT patients. Heard about your brother. If he's open to it, I'd like to come meet him. Emily read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the table, covered her face with both hands, and finally let go of what she'd been holding back for 6 weeks. She cried hard, fully, for about 4 minutes, the way she almost never let herself, the way she trained herself out of, because someone always needed her to be the steady one. She cried for the years and the bills and the nights of math, for the parking lot and the $12, for Danny's speech and Richard's apology and Michael's handshake, for Jack's voice on the phone saying good about Danny crying. She cried for her father, who taught her something so simple and so lasting that it had outlived 4 years of just surviving and come back to her shaped like 200 motorcycles, and a nurse named Carmen who wanted to meet her brother. When she was done, she washed her face, dried it, picked her phone back up, and wrote to Carmen, his name's Danny. He'd love that. Thank you. She set the phone down, went to bed, slept better than she had in 4 years. Carmen showed up on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after that text, arriving the way people arrive when they mean what they said, right on time, no fanfare, a well-worn bag over her shoulder, dressed in the practical clothes of someone whose days mattered more than how she looked spending them. Mid-40s, compact, unhurried, dark hair, and that particular quality of attention Emily had come to associate with people who were genuinely good at caring for others, not the performed version, the real one, the kind that notices small things without announcing that it's noticing. Emily opened the door. You must be Em. Most people call me that. Roy said you'd say something like that. Emily laughed before she could stop herself. Danny was positioned in the living room with the studied casualness Emily recognized as his way of managing the vulnerability of meeting someone new. Angled, so the first thing a person saw was his face, not the chair. He'd done this since the accident, and Emily had never once pointed it out, because it was his coping mechanism. It worked for him, and it wasn't her place to make him self-conscious about it. Carmen walked straight in, looked directly at his face. Danny Carter. Roy tells me you're the reason your sister's worth knowing. Danny blinked, caught off guard. He said that. He said you've been carrying this together for 4 years, and every day to make it lighter for her. Carmen sat down across from him with the ease of someone who'd done exactly this in 100 living rooms, said that was a man worth meeting. Danny looked at Emily with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Something cracked open, some careful surface finally giving. He looked back at Carmen. Roy doesn't know me. No, Carmen said. But he knows people who know people. And he's good at listening to what they say. She set her bag down. Mind if I look at what we're working with? I want to understand what's been done and what hasn't. Then we can figure out if I'm useful. Danny glanced at the bag, then her. Just like that. Just like that. I don't waste time on preamble. If it won't help, I'll say so. If it might, I'll say that too. Danny looked at Emily, who gave him a small, genuine shrug that said, I like her too. Okay. Danny said. Emily left them to it, went to the kitchen, made coffee, and listened through the wall to a conversation, doing something real, Carmen's specific questions. Danny answering with a directness he rarely gave strangers, occasional pauses that meant something was being tested or adjusted. She heard him say something that made Carmen laugh, and heard Carmen say something back that stopped Danny cold in the particular way that meant he'd been caught off guard into actually thinking. An hour in, Carmen came to the kitchen doorway. He's remarkable. Emily looked up from the counter, where she'd been pretending to be busy. I know, his strength retention's better than I'd expect after 4 years without specialized support. That routine you've been running with him, it's good. You figured out something most people need professional training to find. She leaned against the frame. He's been compensating for gaps on his left side, the original Peter never caught. I can fix that. It'll take time, and it won't be comfortable, but if he's willing. He's stubborn, Emily said. Good, stubborn helps. Carmen stayed 3 hours, that first Saturday, came back the next, and the one after. By week 3, she and Danny had settled into a rhythm Emily watched from a respectful distance, specific, a little combative, deeply functional, the dynamic of two people who pushed each other and didn't pretend otherwise. Danny complained about Carmen. In a way, he'd never once complained about Emily's help. And Emily understood that as a good sign. You don't bother complaining to someone you don't trust to take it. The cafe, meanwhile, was becoming something Emily hadn't seen coming and wouldn't have known to hope for. She'd expected the early weeks of her management to be about stability, holding the ground, preventing backslide, making sure the changes she and Michael had agreed on actually took root in daily reality. She hadn't expected the place to grow, but it did, in the specific way a place grows when the people inside it are finally allowed to be whole, when staff stop performing competence and start actually using it, when the gap between what people can do and what they're permitted to do finally closes. Cole stopped over-smiling within 2 weeks and turned into one of the sharpest floor people Emily had ever watched work. Attentive, quick, a natural sense for which tables needed attention and which needed space. Jenny's adjusted schedule unlocked something that had been sealed off, and she became more present, more herself, in ways customers noticed without knowing exactly what had changed. Even the kitchen shifted. Marcus started speaking up, offering menu opinions he'd sat on 4 years, and Michael actually started listening. 2 of those ideas became real changes customers noticed and commented on. Richard Collins ran the back-office systems with a careful thoroughness Emily hadn't given him credit for, and now understood was his genuine strength. The scheduling, the course tracking, the supplier negotiations, all the invisible scaffolding of a business. He wasn't good with people, and he was slowly, quietly starting to know it himself. He and Emily built a working relationship that stayed professional and clear, not warm, and was fine being exactly that. 6 weeks into the new role, Michael came in one Thursday, sat at the counter, ordered coffee from Kyle, and waited for Emily to notice him. She wrapped up a supplier conversation and came to sit beside him. "I want to show you something." He set his phone on the counter between them. A review site, the cafe's page. 47 new reviews in 6 weeks. She read 3 before understanding what she was looking at. Driven past this place 100 times. Never stopped. Came in last week on a friend's recommendation, and I have no idea what happened here. But keep doing whatever it is. The waitress remembered my order from one visit. The manager checked every table personally. Felt like a place that actually wanted me there. Brought my dad, 78. Uses a walker, usually treated like an inconvenience wherever we go. Here they treated him like a guest. He talked about it for 3 days. "We'll be back, This is the kind of place that used to be everywhere and isn't anymore. Don't know how they kept it, but they did." She set the phone down. 53% increase in weekday revenue over 6 weeks, Michael said. Weekends up 41. "I don't have a sophisticated explanation for it. I think people can just tell." "Tell what?" "That a place is real," she said. "They can't always name what's different, but they feel it." Michael sat with that, drinking his coffee. "I've been in this business 22 years, spent most of them optimizing the product, menu engineering, cost per plate, table turnover targets." He paused. "Spent a lot less time on the other thing. The other thing being the people who make the product." "Yes." He looked at her. "You knew that before you had any title that let you act on it. That's why you gave a stranger water on a Tuesday morning." She thought about the particular logic of that. How the values she'd inherited from her father, values that had never been strategic in any sense, kept producing exactly the outcomes strategy could never reliably generate. She hadn't been chasing better morale or retention or satisfaction scores. She'd just been trying to be someone her father would recognize, and the business results had followed, because they always do, because people work better when treated like people, and customers stay loyal to places that feel human. And those truths had always held. They just needed someone to actually live them long enough for the numbers to catch up. She didn't say any of that to Michael. "Some things are better shown than explained. I have an idea," she said instead. "Something I want to try." He set his cup down. "Tell me." Jack called on a Friday evening 3 weeks later. 1 year and 4 days, almost exactly. since he'd first walked through the Silver Oaks door and she'd brought him a glass of water with both hands. "We'll be in Red Valley tomorrow," he said. "The veterans event I mentioned." "I know," Emily said. "I've been helping organize it." A pause. "Roy didn't mention that." "Roy doesn't know yet." Wanted to surprise him. She caught the closest thing Jack had to amusement in his silence. "He's going to have opinions about being surprised. He's going to love it," Emily said. "He just won't say so." The event had been her idea, pitched to Michael 6 weeks earlier. She'd been chewing on something Roy said the morning of the 200 bikes. That the Brotherhood wasn't just leather and engines. That most of those men had spent years doing charity work and community support that never made headlines. Because it wasn't the story people wanted told about them. She'd thought about that alongside the Silver Oak, and what a community space could actually be if it tried. She'd proposed a monthly gathering, the cafe as a landing point, first Sunday of every month, for veterans and their families, free breakfast for veterans, subsidized by the cafe and topped off with donations from the network she'd started building through Michael, plus a small resource table with information on benefits, medical assistance, housing support. Nothing elaborate, just a place, a time, a meal, and the knowledge that someone had specifically set it aside for you. Michael had said yes before she finished the pitch, then connected her with 3 veterans organizations in the county who'd agreed to staff the table. Oh, the Fresno man who'd sat at the counter the morning of the 200 had volunteered to come personally every single month and had quietly covered the first 6 months of free breakfast out of his own pocket. The first event ran 3 weeks earlier. 14 veterans, 4 family members. Jenny had worked the floor and told Emily afterward it was the best shift of her whole life. Cole stayed 2 hours past his shift and asked, just to help set up. Tomorrow would be the second one. And the riders headed for the county's veterans event, Jack's group, Roy's group, riders from Bakersfield, Riverside, Fresno, were planning to pass through Red Valley, and Emily had arranged for the cafe to open early with enough food to feed everyone who'd ridden through the cold morning. She hadn't told Roy, wanting it to simply be what it was, not a thank you, not a gesture, just a meal ready when people arrived, a place warm and open, which was really all she'd ever thought a place should be. "Emily," Jack said, "you organized a veterans breakfast, monthly. First Sunday," she said. He was quiet a beat. When he spoke again, his voice carried that particular quality. The one she'd learned meant something true was being acknowledged, not performed. "Your dad would be proud of you." It landed squarely, even though she'd half expected something like it. "I know," she said. And then, because she believed it, and had given up the habit of deflecting things that were simply true, "I'm proud of me too." The event the next day was the kind of day that never announces itself as remarkable and turns out to be exactly the kind you spend years returning to whenever you're trying to explain something you believe. The riders arrived at 7:30, earlier than she'd expected. She was still in the kitchen with Marcus prepping food when she heard them. That familiar low roll of engines, one she now recognized as something other than intimidating, as the sound of people arriving because they'd chosen to. Roy came through the door first. He saw the table set, coffee already poured, staff already moving, and stood frozen a moment. Then he looked at Emily, coming out of the kitchen with her apron still tied on. "You did this. We did this. You organized it. Your network made half of it possible." He looked around the room a beat longer, and she watched something move across his face, not sentiment exactly, something harder and more durable. The look of a man who'd spent years building something he believed in, finally seeing it reflected back clearly. "Thank you," he said. The first time she'd heard Roy Callahan say those 2 words with nothing else wrapped around them. No context, no qualifier, just the thing itself. "You're welcome," she said. Jack arrived 10 minutes later with riders from his own chapter. Walked in, took in the room, the same room as a year ago, and not the same room at all, and said nothing for a moment, just stood there taking it in. Emily watched him from across the floor and let him have it. understanding what he was absorbing and knowing she didn't need to be part of that particular moment. Then he looked up, called across the room, "There she is," and the same ripple that had moved through the crowd the morning of the 200 moved through it again now. Quiet, real, people looking, nodding, the room doing what a room does when everybody in it is there on purpose and knows exactly why. Danny came to. Hadn't told her he was coming. She was mid-morning on the floor, managing the easy chaos of a busy Sunday, when she heard the door and turned to see her brother wheeling himself in with the particular focused expression he wore whenever something caused him real effort, and he refused to let it show. Carmen trailed behind him. Of course Carmen was there. She'd become a fixture in their lives by now. The kind of regular presence that had drifted somewhere past professional into a category either of them had bothered naming, just accepted as theirs. Emily crossed to him. "Danny, what are you? Wanted to come?" "I was ready for the distance," Carmen said. Helpful. From behind him. "You live 8 blocks away. That's not short in a wheelchair in November," Carmen said. Danny looked up at her, wearing their father's exact expression, the one she loved most, and that also hurt to see, precisely because of how much it meant and how much it reminded her. "Wanted to see what you built," he said. She looked around at the room, tables full, veterans gathered in the corner, with the resource table beside them, Jack at the counter deep in conversation with Earl, who'd driven 2 hours from Fresno for a Sunday breakfast, because that was simply what Earl did. Roy near the window, watching the room, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew his people were somewhere good. Marcus, visible through the kitchen window, doing exactly what he did best, Cole moving the floor with an ease it had taken him 3 weeks to build, and would carry the rest of his working life. Jenny, laughing at something a customer had said at table 4, a real laugh, the kind that had come back once the custody situation had stabilized and the new schedule had given her room to breathe. She looked at all of it, then at Danny, who'd ridden 8 blocks in the November cold, because he wanted to see something his sister had made. "What do you think?" she asked. He was quiet a moment, looking around with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to see deeply, because his mobility had turned him into a watcher. He took in the veterans, the riders, the staff, the resource table with its printed pamphlets, the counter where a man in his 70s sat deep in conversation with someone who'd ridden 400 miles that morning. "Dad would have eaten here every day," he said. She'd been managing all right up until that moment, holding the day at a workable distance, keeping the feeling one step removed the way she'd trained herself. Danny's sentence closed that distance completely. She reached down, squeezed his shoulder hard, and he covered her hand with his. And they stayed like that a moment, to people standing in the middle of a room that was living proof of one good thing rippling out into the world. Then Emily straightened. "I'm getting you a table. I want the eggs." "He's allowed the eggs," Carmen said. And the morning kept moving. Jack found her at the counter around 11. In the quiet lull after the main rush, when the room had settled into its own mid-morning ease, "Roy told me about the next one," he said, ordering coffee. "The February event. We're expanding it. 2nd Saturday too. Not just 1st Sunday. Demands there." The resource organizations asked if we could add a session. I said yes. Jack nodded, sipping his coffee. "You know what you've built here. I'm working on building it. It's not done," he said. "No," she said. "It's not. It won't be." He looked at her steadily. "That's the point." She understood what he meant. Not unfinished as in incomplete. Not something waiting to be framed and hung on a wall. But *** meaning alive. The kind of thing that keeps moving because it's living, not because someone's forcing it forward. The veterans' breakfast would grow, shift, become something she hadn't imagined yet. The cafe would keep reflecting whoever walked through it. The staff would keep surprising her with what they could do once given the room. Danny would keep arguing with Carmen and getting stronger in ways the original therapy never reached. And the network Roy had described, people who'd shown up for one morning and left something behind, would keep doing what networks do when they're built on something real. She thought back to the morning she'd spent in her own car in this same parking lot, palms flat against her knees, shaking, running electric bills and co-pays through her head. She thought about how small that moment had felt, a firing, a humiliation, a private calculation of what decency had cost her. She thought about how impossible it would have been, standing in that exact spot in that exact moment, to understand what it actually was. It was the beginning of all of this. Every single link in the chain. One glass of water, carried with both hands. Jack set his cup down. You know the thing I keep coming back to. Tell me, when I walked through that door a year ago, I wasn't expecting anything. He said it plainly. I'd stopped expecting things from strangers a long time before that. You figure out, after enough years, what the odds usually are, what to brace yourself for. He looked at her. You reset my odds. What do you mean? Every time I walk into a place now, he said, I think of you. I think, maybe this one. He lifted his cup again. You gave me that back. The maybe. She sat with that a moment, turning it over, the specific gift buried in it. Not hope exactly, but the structural groundwork hope needs to exist at all. The willingness to stay open to being surprised, the very thing that erodes after years of being seen as something other than what you actually are. And that one morning of being truly seen could begin. Repairing. She thought about all the strangers she'd never know about, every version of Jack Walker who'd walked into some other place after that morning, carrying his reset odds. The maybe he'd gotten back, and stayed a little more open because of it than they might have otherwise. A chain reaching invisibly in every direction from one Tuesday morning in November. She'd never trace its full shape. She'd never know everything that had moved through the world starting with one glass of water. But she'd know this cafe, and these people, and Danny's stronger left side, and the veterans who showed up the first Sunday and second Saturday, and Carmen's voice carrying through the living room wall, and Roy's thank you with nothing wrapped around it, and Jack calling asterisk there, she's asterisk across a crowded room. She'd know those things. They'd be enough. More than enough. Marcus appeared at the kitchen window. Me table 7 wants you. They want to thank the manager personally. She stood, untied her apron, retied it the right way, the same habit she'd carried since her very first shift here 2 years ago. She looked at Jack. Don't leave without saying goodbye. Wouldn't dream of it. She crossed the floor toward table 7, passing Jenny and Kyle, the veterans in their corner, Earl at the counter, Roy by the window, Danny at his table near the door with Carmen beside him and an empty plate in front of him. Eaten, and no complaints, which meant things really were different now. She passed all of it and felt the room alive around her, and specific, and hers, not in the sense of ownership, but belonging, of having poured something of herself into a thing, and watching it reflected back, and understood. With the particular clarity you only get standing inside the outcome of something, that none of this had ever been inevitable. She'd made a choice. One choice, on a cold Tuesday morning. No calculation, no audience. The kind of choice that doesn't even feel like a choice while you're making it, because it just feels like what a person does. It had cost her, genuinely, concretely, the way real things cost you, when the world is arranged the way it sometimes is. And then it had given back, not as a transaction, not as a reward for virtue, just as the natural consequence of one true thing meeting other people who were carrying true things of their own, and recognizing each other. That was all of it, the whole story. A woman who did what her father taught her, in a world that sometimes punishes exactly that. A man who'd stopped expecting kindness and found it anyway, and everything that moved between them, and outward from them, and kept moving long after that one morning had ended. Emily Carter walked to table 7 and smiled the way she'd always smiled. Not the professional version, the real one. Hi, she said. I heard you wanted to see me. The people at table 7 turned toward her with the open faces of people who'd been somewhere that made them feel human, and wanted to say so. She listened to what they told her. She meant every word she said back. The Silver Oak Cafe was warm, and full, unreal. Outside, the November morning stretched cold and clear in every direction, and somewhere in that parking lot, a long row of motorcycles sat waiting in the sun, patient, still, ready to carry their riders wherever they needed to go next. Some things, once set in motion, don't stop. A kind heart is never truly alone, and in the right hands, a single glass of water can change everything.